Hi everyone. Whether you're watching via another campus as a part of Hillsong Church or via the channel or YouTube, my name is Autumn. I'm one of the creative pastors at Hillsong Church, and with me is Peter James, who is a keyboard player extraordinaire, and we have the honor and privilege of hearing some of his tricks of the trade. He's played across lots of Hillsong albums and projects. He works kind of in his own studio as well, producing lots of different sounds. It's such an honor to have him here today. We're going to be chatting through all kinds of sounds, mainly for weekend services, in the context of Hillsong Church. Again, if you're at another campus watching, welcome. We hope that you enjoy this. We hope that this answers some of your questions and mine, because I have a lot of questions. Anyways, over to you, Pete. Why don't we give Pete a hand? Thanks for being with us.
Cheers. Cool. So I thought, for everyone's sake, I'd start pretty basic and just cover the basis of like keyboard, computer, how does that all work, and then we'll start to get into some more advanced stuff and kind of talk about how you can create specific sounds for specific situations. So it's no use having a great sound but not knowing where that fits. So I'm going to open up a template that, for example, just has pianos, and I'm going to show you a bunch of different pianos and how you'd use it and why you'd use a dark one, why you'd use a bright one, how to use compression, EQ, all that kind of stuff. So first of all, I'm just going to quickly talk about the setup. We've just got a basic, I think it's a Yamaha motif here, but all I'm using this is as a MIDI keyboard, so I'm not taking any audio from it. This is just giving you a MIDI signal to your computer. And you can connect the keyboard to your computer in a couple of different ways, either USB to USB, which I'm using at the moment, or you can get a MIDI to USB lead. The thing you got to remember if you're using MIDI to MIDI is 99% of the time you have to download the driver for your computer specific to that keyboard. So if I was using the Yamaha, I'd go onto Google Yamaha driver, find the specific keyboard, download it, install it, and then that allows the computer to see the keyboard. But if you use a MIDI to USB cable, most of those cables don't require any software, so they're always a really safe backup, especially if you're playing at a church or a venue that you might not know what keyboard you're going to get there. I always keep one of those in my bag just in case. So I know that no matter what keyboard I get, the computer's going to be able to talk with the keyboard. So that's the first thing. The second thing is an interface. You can use the built-in sound card from your laptop, but I wouldn't suggest it. The way you'd do that is just taking a little jack out of your computer and splitting it into stereo. But the sound card on most Macs isn't very high quality. So I wouldn't recommend that. You can get a really good interface for a couple of $100. It obviously goes up in price on quality and the amount of inputs and outputs you need. For this setup, all you basically need is two outputs, a left and a right, so you get stereo. And you can get, like I said, a really good interface for a couple of $100, and it's definitely worth it. Okay, I've got a few other leads in here. I've got a little USB hub because I'm using authorization dongles and stuff. I've run out of USB ports, so that's what that is. I'm running the interface via a Thunderbolt lead. Some are USB, some interfaces are USB, some are Thunderbolt, some are Firewire. I think there's a few that are out there like that. Trying to think if I covered everything. I've got this little MIDI controller. Basically all that is giving me additional sliders and knobs, so I can map those to my software, so I don't have to always be moving my mouse around and clicking and changing sounds. I can actually use this little MIDI controller to control my computer. Some MIDI keyboards come with a whole lot of sliders and knobs, and you don't need an additional thing like this, but for me this works because I can take it anywhere and put it on any keyboard. Okay, software. I'm using, if you look at the screen, it's actually MainStage 2. You can't actually get MainStage 2 anymore. The latest version is MainStage 3. The only reason I'm using MainStage 2 is because up until now, it's been the most stable version of MainStage, and I'm using a lot of third-party software, so software from companies other than Apple. And for some reason, MainStage 2 has been the most solid, stable version. So I always choose stability over features, especially with what we do at church and we're recording and albums and all that. The last thing I want is something to glitch, so I'm going with the true and tested version. But you might find that MainStage 3 works fine. It's because I've got so many different pieces of software from so many different companies that I've found 2 to be the most stable. So 3 looks a little bit different, but all the same kind of principles apply. MainStage is an Apple product. It's only like $30 from the App Store. Pretty cheap, but it does everything that we need for live use. You might see on stage 2 computers. We have 2 separate computers usually. One for basically just keyboard sounds, and the other one is a dedicated tracks rig. And we use Ableton and a multi-out interface for that. So if you're looking on stage and you see 2 computers wondering what the 2 are, we have them separate obviously because it's safer to have them separate, and it's obviously half the amount of stress. So 2 computers kind of sharing the load for that. So that's the basic setup. MainStage, I'll quickly talk about it. An overview of what MainStage is basically it plays software, it plays sounds. You can get everything from sampled pianos to Rhodes to Whirlies to any kind of sound that you can think of, really. And it's kind of a sound organizing, I guess, and it's set up for live use, so you can really customize everything for live use. You can use its own sounds. It comes with a heap of sounds by itself, but then, like I said, you can add other pieces of software like Omnisphere from Spectrasonics. Most of us guys that play at church have that piece of software because it's amazing for pads and leads and really kind of atmospheric sounds like your pads and stuff like that are kind of where it shines. So that's a piece of third-party software that I'd use. I'll quickly go to the layout section and just talk a little bit about this. As you can see, I've got a whole lot of virtual sliders and knobs there. And I've tried to set it up so it looks like my MIDI controller. There's nothing worse than looking at the screen and then looking at your hardware and it not matching up. And in a split second, you need to go, okay, I need to move that slider. Which one is it? So rule of thumb, when you're setting up your MainStage template, it doesn't have to look like mine. It should look like your MIDI controller or your MIDI keyboard that you're using with all your buttons and knobs. You can put as many sliders and knobs and stuff in there. You can move them all around. You can even put you can even put a text box in there, which I had a little cheat sheet for the last album. You can see I've got beautiful name in D and the tempo for it. So you can put text and do whatever you want inside and just really customize it to what you want. So yeah, all those sliders can then, in this section, in the edit section, be mapped to any parameter that you want. So it can be assigned to a global parameter, which obviously volume would be a global parameter. You move the volume up and down and it'll move the volume, the master output for all the sounds. If you want a global mapping, whoops, I keep going to the hot corner. Click on the top where it says MainStage and you can map all those to global parameters. Like basically a global parameter is something that applies to every single patch below that. Then if I go to an individual sound, I can map sliders and knobs specific to that specific sound. So I can say, I want to map the low pass filter to this pad so that when I move the mod wheel up, it's going to brighten and mellow out the sound. Does that make sense? So I'm just going over it really, really quickly. If any of you want any more information about this, I've actually got a YouTube channel, Peter James Productions, and I've got a whole lot of tutorial videos that actually talk about how to set up a MainStage template. I go into detail about kind of a setup like this, and also things like volume matching and a whole lot of things like that. So if you want kind of more expanded version of what I'm talking about, you can check it out there. Okay, I'm going to get on to pads because probably the keyboard player The two main sounds that a keyboard player would be at church, a piano and a pad. So I'll start off with just a basic pad. I think it's on this one. There's actually 3 pads mixed together, but I'm just going to solo one of them and just talk a little bit about it. So that there is an Omnisphere pad. I'll open it up so you can see. Okay, it's an Oberheim pad, so it's actually sampled from an old Oberheim keyboard. As you heard it get brighter and mellower, that's called a low-pass filter. And basically what I'm doing is the pad by itself, without the low-pass filter on, sounds like this. Really bright. There's a little bit of reverb on that as well. But pretty much all of my pad sounds, actually all of my sounds in my MainStage template, apart from my piano and Rhodes, all have a low-pass filter pre-mapped. Now, every bit of software is a little bit different. In Omnisphere, it has specific low-pass filter settings that you can set and map. I've already pre-mapped it. As you can see, if you look at the screen, that cutoff frequency is moving up and down when I move the mod wheel. Now, if you want a visual representation of what's going on, I'll bring up an EQ and show you visually what it's doing. So at the brightest setting, there is no EQ. And what happens is when I move the mod wheel down, it starts filtering out all the top end frequencies all the way to the bottom. So it's doing this kind of thing. That's what happens when the mod wheel is down. See how there's only low frequencies coming through? And then as I move it up, it's obviously going to get brighter. So that's visually what's happening. And the reason why we do it like that, or the reason why I do it like that, is it gives you flexibility with all your sounds. I usually use it to build a song dynamically. So when we first start a song, I'm not going to want to start it off like that. I'm going to want it really mellow, and then as the song builds up, I'm slowly moving the cutoff frequency up. If you're playing behind an MC or anything like that, you don't want a pad that's kind of clashing with the same frequencies as your human voice. So a quick example, like that, if you are using a pad for ministry time, if I had the pad right up like that, open, completely bright, and tried to talk over that, it's kind of hard to hear what I'm saying. It's hard to hear what I'm saying, right? I'm going to leave the volume exactly the same. All I'm going to do is move the low-pass filter down. And now it's completely out of the frequency range of the voice, and you can hear exactly what I'm saying, but the fullness of the pad's still there, all the bottom end, all the kind of guts of it's still there, and it's creating atmosphere without clashing with the frequencies of the human voice. So that's kind of a trick that I do on all of my pads. And like I said, it just gives you dynamic range. You can just, by moving that mod wheel up, make it really bright, bring it right down at a, just by moving that mod wheel down. So really quickly build something up and pull it back down. A second thing that I do with most of my pads, I'll just go into the second page here, is I have the velocity sensitivity at 0. So what that means is no matter how hard or light I hit the keyboard, the pad sound's going to be exactly the same volume. So I'll brighten it up for this example. I'm going to hit it really hard and then really light. Exactly the same volume. The reason why is we want the pad to be consistent across all notes. It especially comes into play when you start layering a pad with a piano. So you want the piano to be velocity sensitive. So you want the piano to get louder, bring in higher samples of that piano when you hit it harder, but you want the pad to stay consistent underneath it. So every bit of software is a little bit different. we're using Omnisphere most of the time, so I thought I'd just show you inside that. Another little trick in Omnisphere is this little link button. So Omnisphere, most sounds are made up of one or two parts. If you hit the link button, it links both sounds together, so whatever you change for one sound, it'll change for the other one. So just a little trick if you're wanting to change the velocity sensitivity or low pass filter, hit the link and then you don't have to do the same thing twice in Omnisphere. While we're on pads, I'll just show you a little stack that I've been using. So that was one pad. I'll open them all up so you can see. These will change. In about 6 months, I'll probably have new sounds and new ideas. But at the moment, this is the kind of pad stack that I like to use. So it's an Omnisphere CS80 string patch. It's really cool because it alternates left and right like an old analog keyboard. Can you hear the panning kind of going left and right? That's a really good sound if you're wanting to double strings. It's not an authentic string sound, but it's from an analog string machine. So it has kind of the flavor of a string or strings, but it's analog-y and really warm. So I mixed that one with the one I showed you before, which I've already opened up. And the third one is something a little different. It's actually a custom sample. In Omnisphere 2, you can actually sample your own stuff, import it into Omnisphere, and use that. So I've got an OB6, which is an analog keyboard at home. I sampled that through my Big Sky Reverb pedal, then imported those samples into Omnisphere, and I created my own pad out of it. So I'll just solo that and show you what that sounds like. So that's one of my own ones, and then you can mix them all together and you get this kind of vibe. I'll start with one and then mix them all in. And then you can bring in or out whatever pads depending on how big you want it. So that kind of adds to my dynamic range because I've got 3 different pads. Well, 2 of them are kind of similar, but 3 pads, all with low pass filters on, all mapped with volume to volume sliders on this thing, so I can at any point bring in one or all 3 of the pads, brighten, mellow up. Yeah, so that's kind of my go-to kind of pad sound at the moment. Actually, I'll just mention one more thing. Let me go back to this. Another thing that's really good to know about any sound that you're manipulating or wanting to change or edit is the attack, decay, sustain, release, and that's in the bottom corner here. It's on the amp setting at the moment. So obviously, attack is how much time it takes for the sound to build up to its maximum volume. Decay and sustain work together. I'll skip those because we don't usually touch those unless you're wanting a prominent attack and then it dropping down, so kind of a plucky sound. You'll muck around with the decay and the sustain. But the 2 main ones that you need to know, attack and release. So if I move attack up, put the mod wheel up. There we go, had it off. Here we go. So that's the attack. The release is obviously when I release the keyboard notes, how long is the sound going to last. And those 2 parameters are really good to kind of get to know and muck around with. So I personally like to have my attack pretty fast, almost at 0, and I'll give you a few reasons why. So, and my release pretty short too. The thing is, if I'm doing bass notes, and I have, for example, a long release, all my bass notes are going to start to mush into each other. So that's the last thing you want. You don't want it to be, let me show you. I'm going to put the release up. There you go. If I start moving my bass notes around, see how it starts to sound really sloppy, and the last thing I want is the bass end especially to get really mushy. So I have my attack and release pretty tight. It just means I can change chords quicker too without it getting too mushy. So that's a couple of little tricks for setting up your attack and release with your pads. Cool, I'll move on to pianos. And when I'm talking about this stuff, try to think of any questions that you might have in relation to what I'm talking about, and we can get to those at the end. Okay, I'm going to try to open a second template at the same time, opening it with MainStage 3, not 2. Okay, so I'm going to open up a template that has basically 12 different piano sounds. It's all the same piano piece of software, and I've got a reverb with it, the same reverb. But I kind of want to show you a couple of reasons. I want to show you kind of the difference you can get out of one piano sound, and explain what and why you'd use one over another. So if I chose something like, I've just called it extra dark. And just a sec, I'm going to mute this one. Okay, so this is the giant piano. I'll open it up so you can see. Now, if you're wanting to use a really dark piano like this one, I've actually EQ'd it pretty dark. I've taken off a lot of the top end. If you look at that really quick. Now, you would only really use a piano that dark if you're doing maybe a mellow, soft piece just with piano. Obviously, something that dark is not going to work in a band mix because it won't cut through the mix, but it might sound really nice by itself because it's warm, it's rich sounding, but it's not really going to cut through. I'll go to a little bit, it's still dark, but not quite as dark. Okay, here we go. Still pretty dark. Again, this is moving more into maybe a cut down band. You could use something that dark if you had like acoustic and you only had a couple of string players. Nothing with big guitars or anything like that. I've partnered it up with Valhalla Vintage Verb. We use that reverb quite a lot. It's pretty cheap, so using that. A little trick with reverbs, if you want a long reverb, maybe cut out the bottom end of the reverb. So the last thing you want is a long, muddy, low-end type reverb. I'm going to push the reverb right up and show you what I mean. That's what I've used, is an 8-second reverb, which works great for slow stuff. Probably wouldn't have it that long for church. And then that's the EQ. So I've taken out all the bottom end, dipped it around, 400-500. And it means you can have a long reverb that's really wet, and it's not going to muddy up your sound too much. So when I stop playing, you can hear the reverb's kind of mid and higher sounding. I'll go on to more of a standard piano. Okay, let's try this one. As you can hear, it's starting to sound a bit brighter. The same principle applies with the reverb. I put what's called a high-pass filter. So what I was doing to my pads was a low-pass filter. This is the opposite. So it takes out all the bottom end. So you get the nice chorusy, shimmery reverb, but you don't get the low-end mud and the sustain on the bottom end that you don't want. I'll show you. I think it's probably the same EQ setting. There we go. Yep. As you can see, a lot of bottom end and then that dip in the middle as well. Another thing to note is how wet you have your pianos. You can have it quite wet if it's like a section of the song where it's just featuring the piano and it's kind of cut back. But as soon as you're putting guitars, drums, bass, everything on top, I try to back my reverb right off because it's just going to muddy up the whole mix. It's one of those things that's really good, especially when you're the solo instrument or you're the prominent instrument in a band. But when you start layering too many instruments, back the reverb right off, and do it like that. So I'll actually do that in the middle of a song. Like if I'm doing something like To My Knees or something that's pretty much a piano song from the beginning, I can push the reverb up to make it nice and reverby and chorusy and full sounding, and then as the band comes in, I can just bring the volume of that reverb back, just so front of house doesn't get annoyed and kind of can't fit me in the mix. Then we move on to, let's skip to this one here. So I would use this piano, it's even brighter, and it's got compression. So I'd use this piano for kind of praise stuff like Young and Free. And if I play something like octave stuff. It's got quite a big compression thing on it. I'll open it up and show you what it is. This is a Waves 1176 replica. And those are the settings, if you can see that. This is what's happening. You can see the needle moving. I've actually got quite a slow release on it, so it's keeping the piano present and in your face longer. But like I said, I'd normally only use that for praise songs, and it's when I want that big octave kind of rock piano sound. And those are, there's ones in here that are even more compressed and ones that are a little bit less compressed, but those are kind of the main ones that I would use. Usually the standard with either no compression or maybe just a tiny little bit. And then I'll have darker pianos for more solo stuff. Let's go back to the standard one that I usually use. So with dynamics, there's a few ways of keeping them under control. You can put a compressor on it, like I showed you there, but a compressor actually gives a specific sound. If you're listening to stuff like Coldplay and everything where they're compressing the upright, it gives that kind of rock piano sound, and it's got that specific sound. But a way that you can control your volume range without compressing it is to use, in this plugin it's called Dynamic Range. And basically the Giant is made up of, I don't know how many samples, maybe 10 samples per note. So they've sampled every single note at low all the way to high velocities. A way that you can control that is actually reduce the dynamic range. So essentially what you're doing is pulling the low samples up in volume. And so if I turn it down all the way to 0, there's going to be no dynamic range because the soft velocities are going to be as loud as the loud. The louder ones will be brighter, but it's not going to be louder, if that makes sense. Let's take the reverb off so you can hear it better. For contrast, here's the other way around. See how you couldn't even hear the low velocities? So I have it a little bit kind of anti-clockwise, so I'm bringing up the low velocities. That way you can play a nice worship song with a piano that doesn't get lost at the low velocities and doesn't smash everyone in the ears when you hit it hard. So So I'm doing drastic volume changes, but you get the kind of general idea. It's really good to be aware of that and probably put it, like I said, on the side of reducing the dynamic range unless you're going to compress it. But the great thing about having it in a software version is you can do that. With a real piano, you don't have the option of moving the dynamic range down, so the only option you've really got is to compress it. So this way you can get it sounding really natural, but still present, and you can play your soft velocities and still get it being heard. So yeah, this is just a couple of tips for pianos. Okay, I'm going to go back to my other template. I'm just going to close this one. Okay, now layering pianos and pads. So I'll give you a few tips on that as well. Like I said before, the first thing you need to make sure when you're layering a piano and a pad is to turn off any velocity sensitivity on your pad. So I'm just going to bring in a pad with this piano. Now see how I'm accentuating certain notes on the piano, but the pad's not jumping up in volume every time I hit those notes. That's what we're going for when we mix a pad and a piano. The second thing to think about when you're mixing a pad and piano is don't have a pad that has too fast of an attack, because then it's going to kind of clash with the piano's attack. So if I solo that pad, I'll bring the low pass filter up a bit. It's pretty gentle, the attack on it. And put the piano. Because the piano is already attacky, so we don't need to kind of compete with the front end of the sound. Another idea is to have a pad which is even slower in attack and brighter. This is one that I actually sampled myself. I like to make my own sounds. So I sampled a keyboard again through my Big Sky and created this. Actually, was it a Big Sky or was it I think it was. It's got an octave shimmer on it. That might be too loud, but this is another really good option where you have a really slow attack, brighter pad, and you can make it mellow with a low pass filter. So. I put some reverb on the piano too. And then if I play really lightly, the piano drops off and the pad kind of takes over. So that's kind of a couple of different options to look for when you're doing pads and pianos. I'll open up one more template. Just a second while I do this. Because I've got MainStage 2 and 3, I have to keep specifying which version to open it with. This is something that I just recently created. And what it is David Andrew created one called Infinite Pads. I've created one. There's a few kind of ones out there. But basically what I did is I recorded every single chord without the third. So, for example, C, G, C. Recorded that for about 12 minutes. And then C sharp, D, D sharp, E through the whole keyboard. And I've got basically shimmer pads that I can trigger at any time. So this is a really good idea if you're the only keyboard player playing, like you don't have the option of having a second keyboardist to cover your pads. So a cool thing is you might not know that you can actually run two MainStage templates at the same time. You don't actually have to have just one. So you can import these or similar ones that you might want to make into your own, into your master template, or you can actually have them both open at the same time. So I'm going to show it like that so it shows what's happening. Now I'm going to take the pad out of my piano, so just have basic piano. There's a little bit of reverb on it. Now, I don't know if you could see it, probably can't, but across the bottom of my MIDI controller, I've got C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, all the way to the end. And so I've mapped those buttons to these buttons here. And so at any given time, I can set up a pad. Let's say I'm playing in D and I want to go to A. I can push the button that says A, and it's going to set up an A pad. It should set up an A pad if the volume's not down. Okay, let me try that again. So I can push one button. And it's not working. I thought I had that map, but for some reason I didn't. So what I should have done is pre-mapped all the sliders and knobs and everything for this template, but I haven't. As I was saying, I can be in like the key of D and hit an A, and it will set up an A pad. No, I'm not playing any pads, it's just an A pad that's kind of constantly going. So if I stop, it keeps going. I can fade it, and it slowly fades out. Then I can go D. I can fade that out, and then I can go G, or kind of have them overlapping a little bit. And this is awesome if you're having to play tracks and do piano and cover pads and everything. You can just push one button and kind of set up a pad, and you can set it all up so you've got a low pass filter on if you want. You can set it up so your volume, yeah, it is mapped to that. So I can have just a piano, and then just move it up. So that's another really good option. And just hit one button and it fades if you're kind of having to multitask and do 3 things at once. Cool, I've kind of covered pianos, pads, some other different options if you're the only keyboard player. Do you have any questions that you might want the answers to?
We should give Peter a hand, hey. During when we were doing the last album, we took advantage of that little pad thing a lot.
It's awesome, eh?
Because we were going in and out of lots of different things, and it was magic. So yes, we'll have to see if we can get that to everyone. I thought that it would be great if we get Omar. Omar is our front of house engineer, and I thought it'd be great if Omar, yes, give Omar a hand. It'd be great if Omar chats to us about what he loves about the sounds, what might make him pull a sound out of the mix, what his pet peeves are about keyboard players. This is your chance.
Awesome. Yeah, so there's a few things I'll always, you as a keyboard player should be thinking about when it comes to EQing your pads. For example, if you are trying to make your pad really bassy, to be honest, the reality is that I'm gonna cut that off out of the mix because I already have a kick drum and a bass in the mix, and I don't want to fight that space in the mix. That's one thing. The same thing, something Pete said about how the pads need to sit in the try to cut a lot of the voice frequency from the speech. So if someone is singing, if you try to take a little bit of the 2 and 4K out, that will clear up a lot of the vocal space, and then I don't need to do anything to your keyboard. One thing he said too about if you are playing by yourself, yeah, feel free to add reverbs and texture and everything, but when you have a full band together, try to just clean it up take the reverb out. Why? Because we already have 10 instruments playing at the same time, and having a reverb, what the reverb is gonna do is gonna push your instrument back out of your mix. and there is nothing I can do about it because that's like, adding an effect. It creates a depth on the instrument. That's one, and then one more thing. What was it? Oh yeah. So the width. There is some plugins that have the width button, like the knob that make when you put it on the headphones.
I'll add one in so you can...
Yeah.
Here's a width plugin from Waves.
Yeah, so if you play something with like...
If I do that... It sounds better on a pad than a piano, but...
Yeah. Exactly. So when you listen to it on your headphones, you'll be like, wow, this is it's crazy. It sounds amazing, left, right, on my ears. But reality is that when you put it on a mono, which let's just say a lot of people will be listening, when we mix in broadcast, we send that feed to televisions and stuff like that. They're listening technically mono. When you do the summing of your left, right, the top end is going to disappear. Like there is nothing because it will cancel each other. So that's really important to know how much depth you add into your keyboards. And then, one more thing, and we do a lot in conference, is that Ots ask me all the time, when we play in a bigger arenas, you gotta keep in mind that, how much reverb I need to add to my sound. So if you are playing in conference, you might need to back up your reverbs because, the room is already a big reverb. In this place, you have a little bit of, chance to play with the reverbs. But yeah, just bear in mind on that.
That's awesome. Very good. I had a question. With the venue that you play in, it's real important. We normally always, even if I'm trying out a new sound in the convention center, even in this room, I'll say to Omar, hey, I've got this new pad sound, what do you think? And get his feedback straight away, because then they can actually help you craft a great sound. I have a question for you, Pete. All of this has been amazing and mind-blowing. If you're someone and at your campus, at church, you just have this. I know down in Melbourne, they have a few, they have a couple of campuses that just have a Yamaha S90. Where do you start? If you don't have any of this, What do you do?
Cool. The good thing is a lot of the principles that apply to this also apply to keyboards. If you look at this Yamaha, it actually has a cutoff frequency. So you can find a really nice pad, make sure there's not too much release on it, and make sure the attack's tight. And then you could actually use the cutoff to make it brighter and mellower. So you can actually do it with these, and then maybe layer it with a good piano sound. Yamahas make really good piano sounds, so any of the piano sounds are going to sound really good straight out of the box. Yeah, and you look at all this and you go, oh, that's cool, look at all the sounds. It took me years to build up all this stuff, and I would never recommend someone go out and just drop the few $1,000s on everything that I've got. I've been using them for 10, 12 years. When I first got a computer, I only bought one piece of software, and I used it not solely, but with a keyboard and my computer. So that would be a way that I would suggest if you wanted to get into technology. Just get MainStage, it's $30. Still use your inbuilt sounds just for stability, because everyone knows that computers can be a bit iffy. If you don't know how to set it up really well, then you're going to run into trouble. So ease yourself into it. Get one piece of software, use it for 6 months, get another piece, learn it. I'll quickly go over just a few little MainStage tricks for setting up. I forgot to mention at the beginning. The first thing is clipping. A lot of the time, that's one big thing that you have to learn how to do in MainStage. So there's a few different areas that things can clip in, just making sure they don't clip. So when I say clip, I mean your volume's too loud and it's kind of hitting the roof. Or you'll see in a channel strip, it'll go into the red, and that actually gives you really bad digital distortion. There's good kinds of distortion, but that is not a good distortion. So different areas that it can clip in the actual plugin. So I'll quickly open it up. So it can clip inside, for example, this piano. You need to look at the metering at the top, right here. and play your biggest, hardest chord, make sure it doesn't clip there. Then you can also look at any effects that you might have on that, make sure they're not clipping. Look at the individual channel, which is down the bottom here, if you can see my mouse there. It's not clipping, good. And then you have to look at your effects channels and especially your output bus. Because if you start layering one piano and a couple of pads together, they got to sum all together and go out your output. So that's obviously going to give you more volume. So look at your output and just make sure your output's not clipping. Another thing that might sound like clipping is when your computer runs into trouble, like the CPU, it runs out of CPU, so it can't actually process the sound that you want to, and that causes what sounds a little bit like clipping or popping. The first thing is to set up your buffer setting. It's in the advanced section here. So a quick rundown on what buffer setting is. Every computer has to have a buffer. It's basically an amount of time you're giving the computer to process your sound. It's only in milliseconds. As you can see, I actually run it lower than that. I usually run it at 128, but because I'm capturing the screen and I'm sharing the screen, it's putting a little bit more pressure on my computer. So the goal for that is to have the buffer setting as low as you can without it overloading your CPU. Because if you have a higher buffer setting, there will be more delay. So that the delay between the time you play a note and you hear the note being produced from your computer. So in the perfect world, you'd have the lowest buffer setting and as many patches stacked on top of each other as you could. But that's not the real world. Maybe in 5 years, that'll be the case. But at the moment, we have to kind of balance this kind of delay versus CPU overload, I guess. So what I suggest is find the biggest CPU patch in your library that you've got set up. Reverbs take up a lot of CPU, so just be careful with what kind of reverbs you're putting on and effects. Play as many notes as you can, see if you go into overload, and see if you can balance that. So like I said, I usually have mine at 128, and I've got 3 pads stacked up on top of each other with reverb and delay and bus effects and everything, and it's fine. And I'll quickly show you what my computer is so you can kind of compare it. And solid state drives too are great for streaming sampled stuff, like sampled pads, sampled pianos. So if you can see that, it kind of gives you a little breakdown. My computer's about 3 years old, so it's by no means the newest computer out there. It's got 16 gig of RAM and it's got a terabyte solid state drive. You don't need a terabyte unless you've got a lot of sample libraries, which I do, but you could get away with 500 gig solid state. You'd need a minimum of 8 gig, I think. 16 because it's so cheap these days. It used to be a lot more expensive, but that's how I'm running my setup with the buffer settings, comparing that with how fast my actual computer is. So, cool.
Awesome. How good is Pete? And like Pete said, it's kind of just learning. So I think Pete helped me learn everything and helped me come and set up things, and I didn't know what I was doing, and it's just a journey. So if you have pretty much every principle he was applying about sound selection, you can adjust the attack on the pad on these. So if you just have one of these, you can still come up with a great piano and pad and layer it and do the same technique. So I think even if you don't have all the gear, all the principles still apply. You can adjust the velocity, you can chat to your front of house engineer, different things like that. So hopefully this has been helpful, and I learned lots. Thank you so much, Pete, for being here and for sharing all of this with us. If you're in one of our global campuses or Australia campuses, we hope that you enjoyed this. I'm sure your mind has been blown as well. We love you. Have a great night. Let's give Pete another hand.